Welcome to Stratford Mail from Stratford Hall Historic Preserve, where the voices of American history still speak. Find us online at stratfordmail.org and stratfordhall.org. It's season 3, and do we have some fabulous stories for you as we lean into the 250th anniversary of the founding. Your job is to share Stratford Mail with everyone you know, and even folks you don't. Here now is our Vice President of Research and Collections, Dr. Gordon Blaine Steffi.
This month we consider the struggle to reconcile possibility and its loss in untimely death. In the evening of April 28, 1775, the 62-ton schooner Quero departed Salem, Massachusetts, for London. It carried an intelligence packet pertaining to the firefights at Lexington and Concord and had been hastily assembled under the leadership of Boston radical Dr. Joseph Warren. Before Quero set sail, Dr. Warren wrote to Arthur Lee of Stratford, who was then the only agent left to Massachusetts in London. Thus it fell to Arthur Lee to use the intelligence packet aboard Quero to break the news of the shot heard round the world to the British public, which he did in a special extra edition of the London Evening Post on May 28, 1775. The letter Warren addressed specially to Arthur on the day before Quero sailed reported the untimely death of an acquaintance and ally.
Cambridge, April 27, 1775. My dear sir, our friend Quincy just lived to come on shore to die in his own country. He expired yesterday morning. His virtues rendered him dear, and his abilities useful to his country.
Warren is referring to Harvard-educated Josiah Quincy Jr., a lawyer by trade, who in late January took ill with fever and spasms while in England. This was an end-stage evolution of the tuberculosis from which he'd suffered since he was a teenager. Quincy set co-counsel to John Adams in the successful 1770 defense of the British regulars charged with murder in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Like Adams and Warren, Quincy was a staunch advocate of the American cause against British overreach, and wrote,
"In defense of our civil and religious rights, we dare oppose the world."
His radical politics were tempered by commitment to the British Constitution. So while he fiercely opposed the Stamp Act, he denounced as unjustified the mob violence and vandalism that accompanied popular protests in Boston. Despite his aversion to extremism and pursuit and defense of civil liberties, Quincy's spirited writings attracted the attention of Boston's patriot leaders, and he became a trusted voice for the patriot movement. He was closely allied with members of executive revolutionary bodies and sat with Sam Adams and Joseph Warren on the Boston Committee of Correspondence, and with the two Adams, Warren, and John Hancock on the Committee of Safety. On September 28, 1774, Quincy sailed for England on a confidential mission to counteract Loyalist spin on events in Massachusetts, distortions that were being spread by Loyalist authorities like Thomas Hutchinson and Peter Oliver. Quincy also intended to break bread with influential sympathizers, opposition politicians and London radicals who might be willing to wield some of their influence on behalf of the beleaguered colony. He relied in part on Americans like Sheriff of London William Lee and colony agent Arthur Lee, both of Stratford, to help him network with British Friends of Liberty like Colonel Isaac Barry, Lord Shelburne, and Catherine Macaulay, among others. Quincy also met with government bigwigs like Prime Minister Lord North. Quincy could not have known that a mere 24 hours before his meeting with North had received this notice from the king.
The New England governments are in a state of rebellion. Blows must decide whether they are to be subject to this country or independent.
In England, Quincy vacillated between boycotts in pursuit of concessions and conciliation, that's Benjamin Franklin's stance, and revolution, the stance of the Lees. As Quincy sailed home from Massachusetts, his health dipping, he could not know of the shots fired at Lexington and Concord on April 19th. And on April 21st, Quincy confided to his journal that the voyage home would
put an end to my being.
And so it did. Josiah Quincy Jr. died 5 days later in sight of Gloucester, Massachusetts. He was 31 years old. On May 4th, Abigail Adams wrote to John of Quincy's death and lamented that
he wrote in minutes which he left behind that he had matters of consequence entrusted with him, which, for want of a confidant, must die with him.
Dr. Warren lamented the man, whose death he regarded as a premature loss of talent and ability for the Patriot cause. In his letter to Arthur Lee, he did not tarry on that loss, but soon pivoted to the urgency of the crisis afoot in Massachusetts, a crisis shaped by the punitive, intolerable acts of 1774 and compounded by the blood spilled at Lexington and Concord.
The wicked measures of the administration have at length brought matters to a crisis. I think it probable that this rage of the people, excited by the most clear view of the cursed designs of the administration and the barbarous effusion of the blood of their countrymen, will lead them to attack General Gage and burn the ships in the harbor. Lord Chatham and our friends must make up the breach immediately, or never. If anything terrible takes place, it will not do to talk of calling the colonies to account for it, but it must be attributed to the true cause, the unheard-of provocation given to this people. They will never talk of accommodation until the present ministry are entirely removed. You may depend the colonies will sooner suffer depopulation than come into any measures with them. The next news from England must be conciliatory, or the connection between us ends, however fatal the consequences may be. Prudence may yet alleviate the misfortunes, and calm the convulsions into which the empire is thrown by the madness of the present administration. May God Almighty direct you. If anything is proposed which may be for the honor and safety of Great Britain and these colonies, my utmost efforts will not be wanting to effect a reconciliation. I am, in the utmost haste, surrounded by 15,000 or 20,000 men. Your most obedient servant, Joseph Warren.
Already in February, Dr. Warren had written to Arthur,
I am of the opinion that, if once General Gage should lead his troops into the country, with design to enforce the late acts of Parliament, Great Britain may take her leave, at least of the New England colonies, and, if I mistake not, of all America.
Warren imagined here the fatal consequences of a British military expedition into the Massachusetts interior, which seems prophetic in light of the firefights at Lexington and Concord 2 months later. Warren's April 27th letter to Arthur reiterates just what he said in February, that for the Friends of Liberty in Great Britain, the time to intervene decisively is now or never. This is the proverbial knife's edge on which the relationship between Great Britain and New England was balanced after the shot heard round the world.
The next news must be conciliatory, or the connection between us ends, however fatal.
In addition to building a thriving medical practice, Dr. Joseph Warren was involved in every major resistance effort in and around Boston for the better part of a decade, from grassroots street protests to organized revolutionary governance to principal authorship of the Suffolk Resolves, which was endorsed by the First Continental Congress and dictated a posture of active resistance to Parliament's intolerable acts. In May 1775, Warren was elected to preside over the Second Massachusetts Provincial Congress, an outlaw body of the revolutionary government. The Continental Congress appointed Dr. Warren Major General in the Continental Army on June 14th, 3 days before the Battle of Breed's Hill, famously known as the Battle of Bunker Hill, the first pitched battle of the American Revolution. Dr. General Warren was then a 34-year-old widower with 4 children aged between 2 and 10. On June 17th, 6 days after his 34th birthday, having refused formal command in recognition of more experienced leadership and content to fight side by side with rank-and-file troops, Dr. General Warren manned a redoubt atop Breed's Hill, not terribly far from Bunker Hill in Charlestown. During the British assault on the redoubt, Warren took a bullet beneath his left eye, which exited the rear of his head and instantaneously claimed his life. Warren's death resounded hundreds and thousands of times in newspapers, personal correspondence, in art, and in poetry. In a letter to John Adams on June 18th, Abigail Adams grieved,
"Great is our loss."
To which she added 2 days later,
"I wish I could contradict the report of the doctor's death, but 'tis a lamentable truth, and the tears of multitudes pay tribute to his memory. Those favorite lines of Colin continually sound in my ears. How sleep the brave who sink to rest, by all their country's wishes blessed."
On July 7th, 1775, John Adams received this assessment of the Battle of Bunker Hill from his former law clerk, now officer in the Massachusetts militia.
What would cloud any satisfaction we might otherwise take is the loss of that great and good man, Major General Warren. Regardless of himself, his whole soul seemed to be filled with the greatness of the cause he was engaged in. He is now gone, and closes an illustrious life with all the glory those can acquire who bleed and die for the preservation of the rights of their country and mankind.
His glory was immortalized and death romanticized in several oil paintings by soldier and artist John Trumbull, present at Bunker Hill and best known for 4 paintings that now adorn the rotunda at the U.S. Capitol. Against a blackening, smoke-filled sky and a chaotic tableau of dead and dying men, Joseph Warren, clad all in white, has collapsed to the ground. A fellow American cradling the fallen general's head, and a British officer simultaneously deflect a bayonet strike launched at the expiring Warren by a British grenadier, the bloodlust of war momentarily ebbing in recognition of a profound, shared loss, and in recognition of greatness of spirit. A 1775 broadside reflected on the death of this Caesar of the age.
We sore lament, both one and all, in sackcloth let us mourn, brave General Warren's hapless fate, and weep upon his urn. My trembling hand, my aching heart, oh, how it throbs this day. His loss is felt in every part of vast America.
In Richard Emmons' dramatic poem, The Battle of Bunker Hill, or The Temple of Liberty, Warren dies a martyr for liberty.
Thus Warren fell with all his honors green, in ruins, yet with dignity serene. And mothers with a tear upon their cheek will teach their lisping babes his name, the first to speak.
As General Prescott contemplates the fallen Warren, through his tears he pleads,
Here let me slumber. 'Tis a boon I crave, to sleep with Warren, what a deathless grave.
Warren is no longer a mere man, but a poetic cipher for the eternal value of patriotic sacrifice. An elegy printed in Watertown in 1775 poetically entertained the idea of reclaiming Warren from death, but steeled itself against such an idea.
No, rather let thy great example fire each generous breast to emulate thy fame, and thy vast unbounded height aspire to catch a spark from thy celestial flame.
Still another elegy published on July 3rd, 1775 opened,
Sure, godlike Warren, on thy natal hour, some star propitious shed its brightest power.
And yet, Joseph Warren was a man. His death a rupture in the life of his children, who were later adopted by his brother John, a rupture in the lives of his family and friends, and in the lives of his community and country. Warren was an immensely talented leader whose gifts were far too numerous for their loss not to be felt. Abigail Adams again.
Danger, they say, makes people valiant. Hitherto I have been distressed but not dismayed. I have felt for my country and her sons. I have bled with them, and for them. Not all the havoc and devastation they've made has wounded me like the death of Warren. We wanted him in the Senate. We want him in his profession. We want him in the field. We mourn for the citizen, the senator, the physician, and the warrior.
In a June 28 letter to his wife Betsy, Samuel Adams expressed the sentiments of many.
The death of our truly amiable and worthy friend, Dr. Warren, is greatly afflicting. The language of friendship is, how shall we resign him? But it is our duty to submit to the dispensations of heaven, whose ways are ever gracious, ever just. He fell in the glorious struggle for the public liberty.
In late June, Richard Henry Lee wrote from Philadelphia to George Washington in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he had gone to assume his position as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Armies.
Nothing material has occurred since you left this place, except the imperfect accounts we have of the Charlestown battle, which, upon the whole, seems to have nothing unfavorable to our great cause, but the loss of Dr. Warren. To an infant country it is loss indeed. To be deprived of wise, virtuous, and brave citizens.
When Arthur Lee imagined standing down from public service abroad and returning to live among folks with whom he'd been joined in common cause, he added,
Would to God that we could number Warren among them, and that it had been permitted him to see the beauties of that fabric, which he laboured with so much zeal and ability to rear.
So many lives cut short, so much promise snuffed out on all sides. And while the death of Joseph Warren was neither the first fruits of war's terrible harvest, nor the final gleaning, That death seemed to gather up and express with powerful focus the chaotic horror of war and the search for meaning and memory in the face of loss. So it was that John Adams could not but speak of Warren when he wrote a note of consolation to a grieving father, Josiah Quincy Sr., on July 29th.
We jointly lament the loss of a Quincy and a Warren, two characters, as great in proportion to their age as any that I have ever known in America. Our country mourns the loss of both, and sincerely sympathizes with the feelings of the mother of the one and the father of the other. They were both my intimate friends with whom I lived and conversed with pleasure and advantage. I was animated by them in the painful, dangerous course of opposition to the oppressions brought upon our country, and the loss of them has wounded me too deeply to be easily healed. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. The ways of heaven are dark and intricate, but you may remember the words which many years ago you and I fondly admired, and which upon many occasions I have found advantage in recollecting. Why should I grieve, when grieving I must bear, and take with guilt what guiltless I might share? John Adams.
Adams speaks here both to the consolation of patriotic sacrifice, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, 'tis sweet and fitting to die for country, but also appeals to the Stoic philosophy of Cleanthes of Assos, in the translation of Viscount Bolingbroke, to suggest that grief and guilt are inevitable parts of the nature of things, and so it adds to our pain to suppose ourselves immune from the natural order, or to seek to reject or escape that order. The final word on the relationship of loss to possibility I give to Josiah Quincy Jr., who several years before his own death at the age of 31 from tuberculosis, eulogized a friend prematurely dead at the age of 28. His borrowed words from Henry VIII, Act 3, Scene 2, might be applied to so many thousands who did not live to enjoy the possibilities of the new world they helped to create.
This is the state of man. Today he puts forth the tender leaves of hope. Tomorrow blossoms, and bears his blushing honors thick upon him. The third day comes a frost, a killing frost. And when 'tis thought, full surely his greatness is a ripening, nips his root.
From Stratford Hall Historic Preserve in scenic Westmoreland County, Virginia, I'm Vice President for Research and Collections, Dr. Gordon Blaine Steffi.
You know what to do. Like and subscribe this podcast, share it with the world, and support programming like Stratford Mail by going to stratfordhall.org/donate. Your support means so very much.